Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Hoffman, and I'm here with this esteemed panel. Jim Appleton, who's president of New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers, and Matt Forman, who is director of government and regulatory affairs for North American Subaru. Jim Appleton is the president of New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers. He's also the immediate past chairman of the Automotive Trade Association Executives. Mr. Appleton previously worked as managing partner of consulting firm Public Strategies Impact LLC, PSI, as some of you may know, and deputy director of intergovernmental operations for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. He received his JD in 1990 from Seton Hall University of Law and is admitted to practice law in New York and New Jersey. Let's give a round of applause to Jim Appleton. Okay, and our next panelist is Matt Forman. He's Director of Federal and State Government and Regulatory Affairs for North American Subaru. He wears a lot of hats, ladies and gentlemen. Before joining Subaru in 2019, Matt was a senior manager of government relations for Fiat Chrysler, where he focused on environmental and energy policy. Previously, Matt practiced environmental law at the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and international law firms in New York City and Washington, D.C. Today, we're here to talk to you all about decarbonization and transportation. Most importantly, we're talking about the transformative industry of electric vehicles in the transportation industry. I'm going to let Jim Appleton speak first. He's going to kind of give us a lay of the land and talk about what's going on in the industry right now and perhaps the role that government is playing in this industry. So I'm going to turn it over to you to Matt. Jim, sorry.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate it. Do we have the slides? Do you want to put them up? Yeah, next slide, please. So we don't have a lot of time here, so I was going to try to run quickly through some kind of overview, give you a little bit of context for how the industry is. Okay.
Do you want me to point for you?
There we go.
Okay.
All right. First, a little bit of background on the legal and regulatory framework in which the EV and transportation sector is operating currently. Also wanted to talk a little bit about the California Air Resources Board mandates and the advanced clean car rules that are currently in place in New Jersey and a number of other states. I want to talk a little bit about the risks of noncompliance with those rules, and then talk about something that's somewhat topical because you've probably all heard about the so-called Advanced Clean Car 2 rule, which is up for public comment right now as a New Jersey DEP rulemaking. Then I'm going to turn things over to Matt, let him talk about the status of the EV market today, some of the challenges of growing that market, and then the role that government has in creating a better environment for those vehicles to come into fruition. So in order to give you some context, we got to go back to the 1970s. Many of you in this room, I can see, weren't even around then, but I was. The Clean Air Act was adopted by Congress back in the 1970s as a way to get their arms around mobile source pollution. And what they intended to do was to regulate tailpipe emissions from motor vehicles. The only wrinkle was at that time, California had already been deep into regulating automobile emissions because of their demonstrated smog problems. So Congress, in its infinite wisdom, carved out California with the Section 177 waiver and said any other states that want to follow California can do so. At this point in time, there are 16 states and the District of Columbia that are following the California Air Resources Board rule. That is, our Department of Environmental Protection doesn't regulate the motor vehicle marketplace. The federal government doesn't regulate the motor vehicle marketplace here in New Jersey. The California Air Resources Board does. The remaining 34 states are in the federal program, and they respond to the federal clean car rules. I should note, too, it's important that 40% of the U.S. light vehicle market is represented by those 17 states that are currently operating under CARB. So you can see the pressure on the OEMs, and Matt will talk about this. 40% of the market is already subject to extreme control from CARB, and that doesn't even take into account that these are global markets, global manufacturers who are doing business in the EU, where there are also significant mandates being placed. So there we go. So as I said, the New Jersey market is being regulated by CARB. ACC1, the Advanced Clean Car Rule 1, sets marketplace mandates for the percentage of zero-emission vehicles that have to be sent into the state of New Jersey for sale. Manufacturers have been able, under ACC1, to earn credits for zero-emission vehicles, battery or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, hybrids, and plug-in hybrid sales. The 2023 CARB rules, current in place today, require that 22.5% of all vehicles delivered for sale into the state of New Jersey must be zero-emission vehicles. That's in California and the New Jersey and the 16 other states that are signed onto the program. Guess what? California's at just about 20%, so they haven't met the goal. New Jersey is only at about 10%, so we're not even halfway there. And as many of you in this room know, the Department of Environmental Protection, under the governor's direction, has proposed adopting a new and more aggressive rule that would require us to move even faster towards an EV marketplace. It's important to note, as I said earlier, that the ACC1 or ACC2 rule, or the California rule, is a choice that states have opted into. It's either that or the federal rule. So essentially, it's a binary choice for the automakers. Manufacturers have to design and produce vehicles that meet the mandates in these 17 states. As I said earlier, they can earn credits by delivering those vehicles. They can pool credits by selling vehicles in states that aren't subject to the CARB rules, or they can buy credits that are available in the open market. As I said earlier, no state, including the state of California, has ever met the aggressive clean car sales mandates that have been set by CARB. The rule requires manufacturers to send cars, but unfortunately it doesn't require consumers to buy them. Manufacturers will build what government mandates, and they will ship them to dealers who would be happy to sell them. But the flaw in this program has always been that it lacks a mechanism to require consumers to buy them. In August of this year, the Department of Environmental Protection proposed the Advanced Clean Car 2 rule. The public comment period for that rule closes October 20th. Key takeaways on that rule: when the mandates kick in 2027, 35% of all vehicles sent by manufacturers to the dealers in the state of New Jersey will have to be zero-emission vehicles, which as a practical matter is electric vehicles. Again, today we're at 10%. These mandates ramp up pretty quickly by 2035, and 100% of all vehicles sent into the state would have to be electric vehicles. The interesting thing about this is that the vehicles don't have to be sold. Nobody will have to buy an electric vehicle in New Jersey, and we have serious concerns about what the mandates will do in the marketplace. But let me turn it over to Matt at this point to comment.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Before I start, I just want to say that when we think of New Jersey, we don't really think of New Jersey being an auto state, but the reality is it is. There's no manufacturing here, but you actually have 4 international OEMs that are headquartered in New Jersey, and Subaru is one of those in Camden. So what Jim just walked through very briefly is we could spend hours upon hours trying to dig into it because it is incredibly complicated, And it's also incredibly disruptive. This is the most transformative time in the auto industry since the internal combustion engine was introduced over 100 years ago. So if there's one message I would leave everyone with, it's the following, that the U.S. auto industry, including Subaru, is fully committed to this transformation. We've actually, we support the significant carbon reduction in transportation, and we also are committed to electrifying our fleet. When President Biden first came to office, he asked the industry to make a commitment or a pledge to 40 to 50% EVs by 2030. And to my knowledge, I think all OEMs, including Subaru, said, we're all in, we're committed to it. But as Jim said, it's not a question of what we build, it's a question of what the consumers want to buy. So we could build vehicles to meet these standards, but if consumers don't buy them, then we have a compliance problem. So right now, California has been leading this in terms of its regulatory program. They've also been leading in terms of the market. And New Jersey is not that far behind. In fact, New Jersey is, last time I checked, is like number 6th in the country in terms of market share, in terms of number of EVs on the road. I think most of those are Teslas, but it's still a large chunk of the market. So for us as an industry to meet these demanding rules and requirements, it's outside the control of OEMs. There's a lot of factors that go into play. So that's where I want to focus more on briefly discussing what are the challenges to doing this. So we have these rules in place, and what is it going to take for us as an industry to build and sell these vehicles? And the obvious answer for the first one is infrastructure. That is by far the biggest obstacle into transforming the industry and getting consumers to feel confident to buy an EV. New Jersey is a little unique because it's a much more densely populated state. But think if you were to leave New Jersey and you're somewhere out west, a big box state, where you have to drive 150 miles to the next gas station or EV charging, there's a big concern. But even in New Jersey, we still have a problem with charging. I mentioned New Jersey is 6th in terms of market share for EV sales. I believe it ranks last or worst in terms of ratio of chargers per vehicle. For us, you need 7 chargers for every EV. I think New Jersey is over 40 chargers per EV, and that gap is just growing. So for this to succeed, we need to see investment in charging, which traditionally is not the role of an OEM, but you are starting to see OEMs actually putting money in charging. So that's, I would say, the biggest challenge. The other obstacle for us is cost. You could say that that's our responsibility. We build these things. We could control the cost to a degree. EVs, just by the nature of the technology right now, are very expensive. They're probably $10,000 more on average than your internal combustion engine. And so to get that cost down, the biggest factor are the raw materials that go into the batteries. And for us, that's the critical minerals. And you hear a lot about these days, whether it's Washington or all over the country, it's China, 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 when we're trying to decouple from China. Unfortunately, China dominates the market when it comes to processing critical minerals. So for us to build the EVs to meet these demanding rules, we need more of these critical minerals, and we need to bring the cost down for the batteries. And finally, related to cost, there's an equity issue. I mentioned these products are expensive to build. Costs will come down as economies of scale. But right now, there's a large segment of the population that simply can't afford EVs. And if we're going to start talking about 25, 50, 100% electrification, that refers to all consumers. And so we have a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that all communities benefit from this technology. And that also ties back into infrastructure. Right now, you're seeing a lot on highways, but we need to see. The big question is, where are you going to put charging in multi-dwelling units? And also in rural areas as well. So that's a significant challenge.
Great. Thank you, Matt and Jim. That was a great overview and very comprehensive. I wanted to get back to a little bit about what consumers are saying and consumer demand for EVs right now. I think, Jim, you said 10% of the vehicle market right now is electric vehicles, and in 2027, which is just a few years away, the ACC2 requires New Jersey to have 35% of all new vehicles be electric vehicles. Now, you guys, as representatives of dealers and automakers, you talk to thousands of consumers every day about electric vehicles. What are consumers telling you about this electric vehicle transformation?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of interest. There's growing interest. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But unfortunately, when a consumer comes, and Matt touched on much of this, when a consumer comes into the showroom and they start shopping for a new car, and they're an EV intender, what winds up happening in the process is they typically drive out with a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, and for all the reasons that Matt indicated. First of all, the pure battery electric vehicle is $10,000, $15,000, sometimes $13,000 more than a comparably equipped internal combustion engine vehicle. And then they get into the discussion about range anxiety. And frankly, if they're in the dealership, if they're a multiple unit dwelling person, if they don't live in a house with a garage where they can charge their vehicle every night, most consumers are walking out the door because they just don't trust the infrastructure that's there.
Yeah, I would echo that. And if you know Subaru, if you know the company, you usually see a canoe or a bike or a kayak on the top of a Subaru. So for us, trying to tell a customer, sure, you can go out, go hiking in the woods, go camping, and charge. They look at you like you're crazy. Yeah. So,
and hats off to Subaru, because they came up with a great idea this year, which was if you buy an EV, at most of their retailers, you'll be able to borrow a gas vehicle for your long trip to grandma or to the ski trip once a year or whatever. And so for people who live in a single-family home, that's not an obstacle to owning or driving an EV, the long trip. I mean, I've driven an EV for 3 years. I love it. I'll never go back. I leave the house every day with 300 miles of charge. I never have to stop at the gas station. But when I have to stop at a public charging, in plain English, it's a you-know-what show. It never works out well. But for most consumers, the ability to go to a Subaru store and have the right to drive away, once or twice or 3 times a year in a gas engine knocks down the barriers to EV adoption for that group. Can we get to 100% this way? I don't think so. But it does help with a significant segment of the consumer population.
And I know affordability is an issue that you both have talked about, Matt and Jim. And ACC2 can make it very unaffordable for middle and working class families, seniors, renters in apartments who don't have the infrastructure, students. You may be able to afford one EV for the family, but then your student who's working a job can't afford an EV. So can we talk more about affordability of EVs by 2027 and 2035? And is this mandate truly affordable?
Go ahead.
So cost will certainly come down, as I mentioned. Whether it's affordable for all, I think that remains to be, that's the big question. I would say, and not to segue into another topic, but cost is one area where I think that there is a role for the state and federal government to play. If they're going to be mandating the consumer or OEMs to sell EVs, and they are out of reach for many customers, this is a role where the government can play in terms of meaningful consumer rebates. I think we can touch upon that later. New Jersey actually is I'd say, is a market leader in their programs. There are some funding issues, but what we see on the federal level, at least, we have this new 30D program, which is a generous $7,500 tax credit. However, there's all these restrictions. At some point, if you have the smallest amount of critical minerals or any components from China, you're excluded from the program. So that's why I was mentioning earlier about this need to get off our dependence on China for critical minerals. But cost is a major factor, and this is an area where the state and federal government can play a role to help defray the cost.
Well, NJ Car and the car dealers in New Jersey have for 15 years been telling government to put their money where their mandates are. Incentives and investment in infrastructure. And we've had some real wins there. I mean, we have one of the best incentive programs in the country, as Matt noted, not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. And the utilities have been given the green light to go ahead and spend significant amount of money to make ready charging infrastructure. So we're kind of knocking that down. But Jeanette, the big problem with ACC2 is the way it corrupts the marketplace by mandating specific percentages of vehicles that get sent into the state. So if Subaru has to send 35% in 2027 of all the vehicles that they send into the state have to be more expensive battery electric vehicles, Matt doesn't have to comment on this, but I know for sure, because I've been at this for a long time, the other 65% will be the highest trim levels that Subaru can make the most money on when they send them into this state, because they're going to have to balance out the revenue loss from 35% unprofitable product to 65% more profitable product. And who's going to bear the brunt of that? The consumer. And for those of you who've tried to buy a car in the last 2 years, if you think the inventory problems have been difficult to deal with and the price increases that you've faced in the marketplace have been difficult to deal with, it's only going to get worse. When we're at 35% EV mandate and we keep moving our way up to 65%, 75%, 80%, as I've said, I think a new car will become unaffordable for middle and working class people in the state of New Jersey.
So, Jim and Matt, what are your options in 2035 if you don't want to buy a new electric vehicle and you want to buy a gas car, whether new or old? Just lay it out for me. What are your options under the governor's current proposal?
In 2035?
In 2035.
Well, it's either a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle counts.
Okay.
So you have a partial internal combustion engine, but under this program, you cannot sell a pure 100% internal combustion engine vehicle.
Yeah, the options aren't good for my members, the 500 dealerships, 37,000 men and women who make their living in this $40 billion a year industry in New Jersey. The options aren't good for them. But as a consumer, you can go to Pennsylvania and buy an ICE vehicle. You can get online, and I'm sure there will be dealers in Idaho who will be trying to unload their inventory here in New Jersey, and they'll be reaching out to you, and you'll be able to go online and buy a car in Idaho, and they'll flatbed it here into the state of New Jersey. And the dealerships that do business here will lose business, but the air won't get any cleaner. The environment won't improve. People who don't want to buy a new car, can't afford a new car, don't want to go out of state to buy a new car, will still be permitted to buy a used car. They'll still be permitted to hold on to their old car, which means the fleet, which is already 12 and a half, the average age of a car on the road in New Jersey is already 12 and a half years. So the average age of a car on the road is going to just grow longer because people are going to hold on to their old, less environmentally friendly cars. So again, we think that rather than accelerating EV adoption, this regulation will slam the brakes on EV adoption and cause a backlash among consumers that is not going to be good for the industry and certainly not good for the environment.
And I imagine due to supply and demand, used gas cars will also become more expensive for consumers.
Yeah.
We saw that during the pandemic, used car prices. When we had supply chain disruptions that were impacting our production, our supply chain was a mess. I mean, not just the auto industry, it's across the board. Used prices went through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, there's a symbiotic relationship between new and used car sales, obviously. New car sale results in a trade. The trade becomes a used vehicle that becomes available in the market. When new car sales drop, trades drop, supply in the used car market drops. As demand grows as a result of ACC2, because demand will grow in the used car market, people looking for cars that they can't find at the local dealership. The impact, as I say, particularly on middle and working class people who are already being pushed into the used car market, is going to be demonstrable.
So not a lot of great choices there. I just have two more questions. What do you both think about diversifying fuel for lower emitting vehicles? There's been a lot of talk about hydrogen, CNG, just other different fuels in the future and different size class of vehicles. Because I know the Murphy administration likes to talk about electric being the only other source for zero emissions vehicles. So I just wanted to get both of your opinions as experts in the industry on that.
So each fuel, I think, has an appropriate application. So we're only in the light-duty market. So for the light-duty market, the other alternatives really don't make much sense, and that's primarily because of infrastructure. I think if you talk to the experts that design the vehicles, if they could start all over, they probably would say hydrogen is the way to go. It makes the most sense on many factors. But look at the struggle we're seeing on growing the infrastructure for electrification. Hydrogen is exponentially more expensive, the stations to build. So I just don't see it as a practical alternative, although there are OEMs in the light-duty space who are still pushing hydrogen.
I think it's worth noting that, anybody in this room is well aware that, government mandates, government regulations have a tendency to force technology, sometimes in a good way, in a positive way. And I think for the most part, we can look back at technology forcing regulation, particularly in health and safety and environment, as positive things. I'm really deeply concerned, and it reminds me of the conversation we were listening to about nuclear. I'm deeply concerned that that the EV mandates are pushing the industry away from fuel cells, which could have been a good solution and a better long-term zero-emission solution for America, for the world. But because of government mandates, they've been forced to veer away from fuel cells and into battery electrics. And again, I think New Jersey is a good use case for battery electrics. But I think the rest of the country is a better use case for fuel cells.
Yeah, so fuel cells do qualify under ACC2, but it's a question of this. The sales right now are so small. There's, I think, 7 or 10 infrastructure charging stations or refueling stations in California alone.
And the compliance mandates are so heavy that the manufacturers don't have the time to keep researching and developing an affordable fuel cell. They've had to pull off of that and onto battery electrics, which are more accessible.
But to answer your question about natural gas, I think there may be application on the heavy-duty side. But again, the light-duty side, given where the regulatory programs are and the mandates, I think this industry is going down the path of battery electric vehicles.
Thank you both. So last question I have, it's a two-part question. What happens if New Jersey doesn't re-up with California plan? Is it all or nothing here? And what is your message to environmental and public policy makers about ACC2?
Well, again, if New Jersey does not go forward and adopt ACC2, we would revert to the federal plan. The federal plan, by the way, the Biden administration has recently proposed a significantly more stringent federal plan. So it's not all or nothing at all. We would be regulated. We would default to the federal plan, which, again, if the Biden administration is successful, will become extremely difficult for the industry to meet. It will require 67% EV by 2032.
Yeah, so it's not a hard mandate like ACC2, but it's a performance-based standard based on your carbon emissions. But it's proposed in such a way that the only way to meet it is through, I call it, it's more like a de facto mandate, because the only way to meet the emissions requirements is through electrification. And so the EPA is projecting that to meet the proposed standard in 2032 would be 67% of your sales will be battery electric.
And one of our concerns is that when the DEP went out, when the governor said he wanted to be just like California and adopt ACC2, and the DEP proposed a regulation, they never even looked at the federal rule. They never even looked at the proposed federal rule. They didn't model how the new federal rule would work in New Jersey. And again, the OEMs, the manufacturers and the dealers may not always see this the same way. For the dealers, the federal plan provides more flexibility, because it doesn't say the manufacturers have to send X percentage into the state. They have to build vehicles that meet the federal standard, and the dealers would then be free to sell them without any particular mandate or any market disruption. What we've asked the Department of Environmental Protection is, don't go ahead with this now. Slow your roll. Take a pause. Review what the federal government has proposed. And if you think that, that you need to go ahead with this at this time, at least write into the regulation a formal midterm review process so that we can take a look at this in 2027 to determine whether there are obstacles to compliance, and if so, what the public policy responses have to be. Again, what kind of money does government have to put where their mandates are to get us to meet these goals?
Yeah, the posture that the industry is taking at this point is that if the state wants to go forward with ACC2, and they're going to do so, they just need to be mindful of all the other factors that they need to consider, and the other policies that also need to be in place. We refer to them as complementary policies. They need to focus on they need to make sure the infrastructure is there. They need to have a meaningful incentive program. And they need to make sure the grid is reliable, can support this 100%. So that's where, at this point, I would say autos have become more of constructive partners and just saying, if you're going to do it, this is what else needs to be in place for this to succeed.
Great. Well, thank you both. This has been really informative. Can I have a round of applause for Jim Appleton and Matt Forman? They'll be available for autographs in the back. Thanks.